Before I ever heard my sister scream, "Sign the papers or get out," I used to believe that betrayal had a sound, a crack, a snap, some audible warning before your life split into before and after. But in reality, it was silent. It lived in the quiet pauses between familiar words, in the weight of a stare that lasted a second too long, in the way love could soften just enough to let envy slip through. The night everything changed. I stood inside the mansion I bought with the money I earned, staring at Ivy as she held out a stack of papers with trembling hands, not from fear, but from anticipation. She thought she finally had me cornered. She thought she had outplayed the sister who always forgave her, always rescued her, always made space for her even when she deserved none. But what Ivy didn't know was this: I had stopped being her safety net the moment she tried to tear apart the life I built. And by sunrise, she would understand exactly who she had provoked. It began 2 days before the ultimatum on a fog-draped Tuesday morning that smelled like eucalyptus and ocean wind drifting up the hill. I woke before dawn not because I couldn't sleep, but because I'd been sleeping lightly for months. Unease had a way of curling inside my ribs and tugging me awake just before my alarms did. I tried to shake it off the way I always did, stretch coffee, a quick scan of emails, but the feeling lingered like a whisper I couldn't quite catch. After showering, I wrapped myself in my robe and walked down the marble staircase, each step echoing through the house. My home, my sanctuary, my prize for 12 years of building a company from scratch. Some people bought jewelry or vacations when they made their first million. Me, I bought silence, space, a place where no one else's chaos could seep in, or so I thought. I was halfway through my latte when my phone vibrated on the counter with a name that made my stomach tighten. Mom. Calling at 6:30 in the morning was never a good sign. I answered reluctantly. Good morning. Her sigh was immediate, dramatic. Harper, thank God you're awake. Your sister needs you. Already exhausted, I closed my eyes. What happened now? She's distraught. She was up all night crying. She said you yelled at her yesterday. I didn't laugh, but I wanted to. I didn't yell. I asked where the missing funds were. Silence. The heavy, guilty kind. Mom lowered her voice. You know how sensitive she is. Sensitive. That word had covered every one of Ivy's disasters since childhood. Breaking Mom's heirloom vase. Sensitive. Running up a credit card bill during college. Sensitive. Stealing money from Dad's retirement fund. Sensitive. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to swallow my frustration. She took $5,000 from the company card. Mom, without asking. She needed help, Mom snapped, and she was too embarrassed to admit it. Do you want her to feel like a burden? She is a burden when she lies, I said quietly. Mom gasped softly as if I'd slapped her. You have always been so cold. Cold, another familiar accusation. Cold because I set boundaries. Cold because I said no. Cold because I refused to drown in Ivy's mistakes again and again. Mom, I said, steadying my voice. I'll talk to her, but I can't keep fixing everything for her. Well, she huffed. I hope you'll remember we are a family, and families make sacrifices. I hung up before resentment curdled into something uglier. The sun had started to rise, soft gold streaks brushing the tops of the hills. I should have felt grounded by the beauty of it. Instead, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Sacrifices. That was always code for giving Ivy whatever she wanted. I glanced around my kitchen, the quartz counters, the custom walnut cabinets, the dining table that sat beneath a chandelier I'd commissioned from a blown glass artist in Santa Barbara. I had built this life inch by inch. I had earned every corner of this house. And somehow my family still treated it like a communal offering. At 9, Ivy finally texted, "Can we talk? It's important." I stared at the message, weighing the inevitable. I agreed, but on my terms. 30 minutes later, Ivy walked into my home like she owned the floor beneath her feet. She always did. She had the kind of beauty people forgave too easily. Big brown eyes, soft blonde waves, a trembling lip that made others rush to soothe her. But I knew the truth. That trembling lip could cut sharper than any knife. She wore leggings and an oversized sweatshirt, her usual poor me uniform. The smell of expensive perfume lingered behind her, a contradiction she always overlooked when claiming she couldn't afford her bills. "Hey," she murmured, head down, voice small. I gestured toward the sofa. "Sit." She sat, pulling her sleeves over her hands. Playing the fragile act. Always the same. "I'm sorry about the money," she whispered. I sat across from her. "Ivy, this isn't the first time." She nodded quickly, eyes shining with tears she could summon like magic. I know, and I'm trying, really trying. But everything is falling apart. I'm behind on rent and my car payment bounced again and work cut my hours and Ivy..." I interrupted gently. "I can help, but not like this. You have to stop lying and sneaking around." She sniffled. "I'm not sneaking. You forged my signature on the approval form." Her eyes widened, offended. "That's not forging, I just borrowed your initials." Something inside me snapped, not in anger but in clarity. The truth was so simple, Ivy didn't believe she was doing anything wrong, because she believed she was entitled to everything that was mine. "Ivy," I said carefully, "you need to take responsibility. I won't always be there to fix things." Her expression hardened. The tears dried instantly. There she is, I thought, the real her. "What does that mean?" she demanded. "It means," I said softly, "I'm setting boundaries. You can't access my accounts anymore, not for anything." Her jaw dropped. "Mom said you'd help me. She said you felt bad." "I feel concerned," I said. "But concern doesn't mean limitless support." Her face twisted, anger flooding in. "Wow, so that's it. You're rich and I'm drowning and you're just going to sit there and watch me suffer. I've given you thousands because you can," she snapped. "You have everything, and I have nothing. Do you know what it's like being compared to you my whole life? Do you know what it's like being the sister who failed?" I exhaled slowly, aching with exhaustion. "Ivy, I don't want you to fail." "Yes, you do," she shouted. "You like being the golden child. You like everyone praising you and feeling sorry for me. And God forbid I get one thing you don't approve of." That was it. The shift. The crack in the mask. Ivy didn't just resent my success, she hated that she wasn't entitled to it. "Ivy." I tried again. "I'm not your enemy." She stood abruptly. "You know what? Forget it. You don't care. You never did." She stormed toward the door but paused, her silhouette sharp against the sunlight streaming through the windows. "You're going to regret this," she whispered. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. The house fell silent. But it wasn't peaceful. Not anymore. I walked to the window, staring out at the driveway as Ivy's car peeled out, tires screeching. My mother's words echoed harshly in my mind. Sacrifices. Family. Sensitive. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky stayed blue. A storm was coming. I could feel it rising in the air, pressing against the glass, sliding beneath my skin like a warning. I didn't know then that Ivy wasn't just drowning. She was dragging me toward the water with her, and she was willing to watch us both sink. If only I'd known how fast she was already moving. If only I'd understood that envy doesn't destroy in bursts, it erodes quietly until the ground beneath you collapses in a single catastrophic moment. And for me, that moment was only 48 hours away. I woke the next morning to a half-dozen missed calls, 3 from Mom, 2 from Dad, and 1 from an unknown number I didn't recognize. The tension clung to me before I was even fully awake, like a thin sheet of ice stretched across my skin. For a few seconds I lay still, staring at the faint lines of sunlight pushing through the curtains, wishing I could pretend yesterday never happened. But denial was a luxury long gone. I got up, pulled on a soft sweater, and padded barefoot down the hallway. My mansion felt cavernous that morning, unusually hollow, the high ceilings and open rooms, echoing with something too brittle to name. I made coffee mechanically, my hands moving from memory rather than intention. The machine hummed, steamed, clicked, small, normal sounds that contrasted sharply with the pit forming in my stomach. By the time I sat down at the breakfast bar with my mug, my phone rang again. It was Dad. I answered with a cautious, "Hi." He didn't bother with hello. "Your sister came home hysterical last night." I pressed my lips together. "Dad, what did you say to her?" His voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Your mother barely got her to stop sobbing." I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. "I told her she couldn't keep stealing from me." A harsh exhale burst through the phone. Stealing Harper, she was borrowing. She was in trouble. She forged my signature. I said steady but firm. Multiple times. Long silence. I imagined the tight, angry line forming around Dad's jaw. "Your mother and I raised you to help family," he said. "Not to call your sister a thief." I rubbed my forehead. "I have helped her. For years. But this is different. You're the older one," he insisted. "You were supposed to protect her." The words landed like a slap, unexpected, insulting, and familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. Protect her, always her. Even when she was the one lighting the matches. "Dad," I whispered, "I'm not responsible for her choices." "Yes, you are," he snapped, "whether you like it or not." He hung up. I stared at the dark screen for a long, numb moment. My coffee had gone cold. Outside, the sun brightened the mist over the garden, but all the gold light in the world couldn't warm the heaviness sliding through me. My family didn't want a resolution. They wanted obedience, and I had stopped providing that. A knock at the door pulled me out of my spiraling thoughts. For one foolish second, I hoped it might be a delivery, a neighbor, anyone but who I knew was likely behind it. When I opened the door, my breath caught. Ivy stood on the porch, looking entirely different than the fragile girl who'd stormed out yesterday. She wore a fitted blazer, her makeup immaculate, her hair brushed into soft waves. A calm, practiced expression rested on her face, the kind she used when she wanted something badly. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Does Mom know you're here?" "Yes," she said quietly. "She drove me. Of course she did." I stepped aside reluctantly. "Come in." She walked in, her eyes scanning the house with a strange mix of nostalgia and calculation. I led her into the sitting room where sunlight poured in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She didn't sit, not right away. Instead, she lingered near the grand piano, tracing a finger along the polished edge. "I used to imagine living somewhere like this," she murmured. "I always thought, maybe one day it could be mine too." A cold prickle slid up my spine. "What do you want, Ivy?" She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We shouldn't fight." I waited. She finally sat crossing her legs, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "I'm sorry for yesterday. I was overwhelmed. I shouldn't have yelled. Almost believable." "Thank you," I said cautiously. "I appreciate that." She nodded like she expected that response. "And I wanted to talk to you because, well, things are harder than I told you. A lot harder." My chest tightened. How bad enough that I might lose my apartment, and my car, and, she looked down, twisting her fingers, maybe even my job. I felt a wave of familiarity. Her scripts always began like this. "Ivy," I said softly, "why didn't you come to me sooner?" Her expression flickered just briefly with triumph before smoothing into vulnerability again. "Because I didn't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," I began then. Quickly corrected myself. "You weren't supposed to be." She looked up sharply, but before she could respond, the doorbell chimed. I frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" She shook her head. I walked to the foyer, glancing through the frosted glass. My breath froze. 2 men in tailored suits stood on my porch, one holding a leather briefcase. I opened the door slowly. "Ms. Harper Whitlock," the shorter one, asked. "Yes. We're here on behalf of your sister, Ms. Ivy Whitlock." Ice spread through my veins. For what, he held up a document thick enough to make my stomach twist. "A family asset restructuring proposal. We've been instructed to present the terms and request your immediate cooperation." My vision narrowed to a pinpoint. "What are you talking about?" That's what I wanted to discuss, Ivy said from behind me, her voice suddenly firmer, more assured. I turned to her fully, slowly. You hired lawyers I needed to, she said, rising from the sofa. You left me no choice. The shorter attorney cleared his throat. Ms. Ivy Whitlock, as the next of kin, is requesting a redistribution of familial assets for equitable support and long-term financial stability. My pulse roared. Equitable support, I repeated, barely breathing. He nodded. We are petitioning to transfer ownership of the Beckford estate. He gestured around my foyer, as well as partial control of the Whitlock Design Company to Ms. Ivy Whitlock. My mind blanked. She's your sister, Ivy said softly, stepping closer. This is the least you can do. I stared at her, stunned, not by the words but by the pure confidence in them. Ivy! This is my home, my company. I built everything myself. You built it because Mom and Dad supported you, she shot back. You built it because I never stood in your way. She shook her head, eyes narrowing. You owe me. I recoiled. I owe you nothing. Her jaw tightened. If you won't help willingly, she said, then we'll do it legally. The attorney placed the documents on the entry table. We ask that you review these and sign within 48 hours. If not, we will proceed with filing. I stared at the papers, pages and pages of audacity, entitlement, vengeance. Please leave, I said quietly. The attorneys nodded, stepping out. Ivy lingered. Why are you doing this? I asked, voice shaking. She looked at me the way strangers look at each other on opposite sides of courtroom tables. Because I deserve something too, she whispered, and I'm done waiting for you to decide when I'm worthy. My mouth opened, but no words came. She walked to the door, pausing only once. You can be generous, Harper, she said, or you can be forced. Then she stepped outside and disappeared into her lawyer's car. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled, stuffed with betrayal. With the echo of every moment I had ignored the truth. With the ghost of every boundary I'd never enforced. I picked up the papers with trembling fingers. They were detailed, comprehensive, carefully crafted. This wasn't desperation. This was premeditation. I sank onto the staircase, heart pounding, breath shallow. The chandelier above me swung slightly, catching the morning light like fractured glass. My sister, my own blood, had hired a legal team to dismantle my life. A war I never asked for had arrived at my door. And somewhere beneath the shock, beneath the hurt, beneath the disbelief, something else began to rise. A quiet, simmering resolve. Because Ivy thought she knew me. She thought I was still the sister who forgave everything, who softened at every sob, who handed over whatever she asked for. She thought she could take everything I built, but she had no idea what I was capable of when someone pushed too far, and she had just pushed farther than anyone ever had. The moment I woke up the next morning, there was a heaviness in the air, thick, unmoving, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to acknowledge what had happened. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint ticking of the hallway clock. For a moment, I let myself pretend everything was normal, that yesterday was just a bad dream, that my sister hadn't stood in my foyer screaming at me to sign the papers or get out waving legal documents she barely understood. But reality didn't loosen its grip. It sat on my chest, pressing down until I finally exhaled and swung my legs to the floor. My phone buzzed before my feet even touched the rug. Dozens of messages, missed calls, voicemails. Most from my parents, a few from Ivy, and one from a number I recognized but wished I didn't. Martin, her attorney. I didn't open a single one. I walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at the woman in the mirror. I had slept maybe 2 hours, but strangely I didn't look broken. I looked resolute. A little hollow, but not defeated. Maybe that was the first sign that something inside me had shifted for good. I dressed in leggings and a soft gray sweater, tied my hair back, and went downstairs. The mansion was silent, sunlight dripping through the tall windows like warm syrup across the marble floor. Every inch of this house was something I had dreamed of and built myself, and now every inch was something my sister believed she could steal. As I passed the kitchen island, my phone buzzed again. This time a single message from a contact saved only as AM Alden call when ready. Everything is in place. I exhaled, grateful for at least one person in my corner, but I couldn't call him yet. Not until I made sense of the storm my family had detonated in my living room. I made coffee hands, shaking just slightly, and took it out to the back balcony. The air was crisp. The garden crew hadn't arrived yet, so the lawn looked a little wild, a little unrestrained, which fit the mood perfectly. I sat and let the morning settle around me. It didn't take long before the memory of yesterday came back full force. My parents standing behind Ivy like guards flanking a queen. My mother's sharp tone, "You owe this to the family, Harper." My father adding, "Your sister is drowning. What kind of daughter refuses to help her own blood and Ivy?" Smirking. Holding the papers like she'd already won. Acting as if my success belonged to her by default, as if my work ethic was an inconvenience she had the right to profit from. Family drama wasn't new. I had lived through years of their small manipulations, their guilt trips, their favoritism. I had grown used to being the one who solved their problems, financial or otherwise. But what they did yesterday crossed a boundary so deep it had never even occurred to me that they would dare. They really believed they could corner me, force me, break me, and I played into it. I let them believe it. As I sipped my coffee, the sliding door creaked behind me. I turned sharply, but it was only Paige, my assistant, my anchor during the worst days, and the only person besides Alden who knew the entire truth. "You okay?" she asked, stepping out with a folder clutched to her chest. "No," I admitted, "but I'm functioning." "That's good enough." She pulled out a chair and sat beside me. "I brought the files you asked for." The forensic accountant finished the tracing report. "You need to see this." I wasn't ready, but I nodded anyway. She opened the folder, sliding a stack of documents toward me. "These are the withdrawals Ivy made from your accounts using the old card you loaned her months ago. The one she claimed she never used anymore." My chest tightened. I braced myself. Numbers stared back at me, each one a betrayal I should have seen coming. $2,400 at a luxury boutique. $9,100 transferred to an account I didn't recognize. $1,800 at a spa I had never stepped foot in. And then the larger amounts, withdrawals in the tens of thousands. My vision blurred for a moment. "This can't be right," I whispered. "It's all verified," Paige said softly. "Harper." She drained nearly $60,000 over the last 8 weeks. I closed my eyes. My grip on the mug tightened. "And these," she said, sliding another page forward, "are the debts she accumulated using your name. Loan applications, credit requests. All rejected, but each one shows she attempted to use your SSN." I felt something inside me pull tight like a rope fraying under too much weight. "She was setting you up," Paige continued. "She planned the takeover for months. Planned, calculated, executed." The room spun for a moment, and I gripped the edge of the table. Paige reached out, steadying me. "Hey, breathe." I took a long, deep breath. The shock wasn't the worst part, the intention was. I should have known Ivy wouldn't stop at begging or guilt-tripping. She always wanted more attention, more sympathy, more shortcuts. And she believed that my achievements, my mansion, my $1,000,000 estate, my business were somehow things she deserved by association. I opened my eyes. The sun was rising higher now, warming the side of my face. And with that warmth came something else, clarity. "She thought she could bleed me dry," I murmured. "She thought she could become you," Paige corrected. The thought made my stomach twist. But before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail notification from my mother. Paige rolled her eyes. "You're not listening to that. My mother won't stop until I do." I pressed play. Harper. My mother's voice came through tight, irritated. "Ivy is beside herself. She told us you threw her out after she asked for help. We raised you better than this. She is your sister. You need to sign those papers today so we can move forward. Your father agrees. We expect you home by noon. I let out a humorless laugh. Home. As if I still had one in their eyes. Paige's expression hardened. They really don't see you at all, do they? No, I said softly. They see what they can take. She reached into her bag, pulling out her laptop. Then, let's make sure they can't take anything else. Before we could start, the intercom chimed sharp, intrusive. Ms. Harper, the house system announced. Your sister Ivy has arrived at the front gate requesting entry. My heart sank. Paige's brows shot up. She has nerve. Let her in, I said, after a pause. Paige whipped her head around. Are you serious? Yes. I stood, setting my mug down with a soft click. Let's end this on my terms. Because chapter by chapter, the girl they once controlled was slipping from their reach. Paige pressed the entry button reluctantly. Security will escort her to the front door. Want me to stay? No, I said quietly. I need her to see I'm not hiding. A few minutes later, the heavy knock came, not timid, not uncertain, entitled, just like her. I opened the door. Ivy stood there with red-rimmed eyes and a manufactured pout, wearing an outfit that cost more than her rent. Her hair was perfectly curled, makeup flawless, like she had prepared for a performance. Finally, she snapped, pushing past me into the foyer. We need to talk. No, I corrected, closing the door behind her. You need to explain. She froze mid-stride, turning slowly. Explain what the money you stole, the accounts you opened, the loans you tried to take using my name. I folded my arms. And the stunt you pulled yesterday. Her eyes widened for a moment before she caught herself and lifted her chin. I was desperate, she said. And you have plenty. Mom says, this isn't about Mom, I cut in sharply. This is about you. You crossed a legal boundary, Ivy. Multiple boundaries. Legal, her voice cracked. You're going to turn this into a legal thing. Between sisters you did, I said. She scoffed, threw her hands up dramatically. Oh, please, Harper, stop pretending you're some victim. You have a mansion. You have a trust fund. You could change my life with the stroke of a pen, and you don't because you like watching me struggle. I stared at her, stunned. That's what you think I asked. That I like watching you suffer. You do nothing to help me. I've helped you every year of your life, I said softly. And you've never noticed. Or cared. She blinked, thrown off anger, faltering. I needed more this time. And you thought the solution was stealing my identity, draining my accounts, forcing me to sign over everything I built myself. Her face twisted. You owe us. You owe the family. You think your success makes you better than us. You think you earned any of this. The words hit me like a slap, because for years that was the wound she kept stabbing. I stepped closer until we were nearly eye to eye. Yes, I said quietly. I earned every single part of my life, every dollar, every inch of this home, every accomplishment. And the fact that you can't stand that truth is not my burden. She flinched. For the first time, her facade cracked. Please, she whispered. You can still sign the papers. Mom said I'm not signing anything, I interrupted. Her eyes widened in panic. But you did, she blurted. Yesterday, I watched you sign. Ah. There it was. The trap fully sprung. My voice softened, steady. What I signed yesterday was meaningless. Every asset is protected by the Blackwell Family Trust. You were never going to get anything. The blood drained from her face. What, you heard me. She stepped back, hand trembling. You tricked me. I protected myself, I said. From you. Her breathing shortened, panic growing. Mom said the papers would hold. Martin said you trusted the wrong people, I whispered. Again. She staggered toward the door, her world unraveling. You can't do this, she gasped. You can't get away with this. I already did, I replied gently. She covered her mouth, shaking. Then she whispered the words that revealed everything I thought taking the house would finally make me someone. My heart ached, not for her choices, but for the girl she had become. You were someone, I said quietly. But you lost yourself chasing what wasn't yours. She looked up at me, lost, angry, desperate. Mom and Dad are going to hate you, she spat. They already do, I said softly. But at least now I don't hate myself. She stared at me, disbelieving, then turned and fled the house, sobbing. I watched her go, my heart heavy but steady. This wasn't victory. It was awakening. I closed the door, leaned back against it, and exhaled. For the first time in years, the house felt like mine again. And so did my life. The call from my father came just after sunset, right when the sky turned the color of bruised lavender. I saw his name flash across the screen, sharp and accusing, like even my phone understood this wasn't a man calling to check on his daughter. This was a summons, a reprimand wrapped in parental entitlement. I didn't answer. He called again and again. Then came the message, family meeting. Tonight, no excuses. For a moment, I just stood there in the middle of my kitchen, barefoot hands still damp from washing dishes, staring at the glowing notification like it was some kind of omen. The old version of me, the still trying to earn their love version, would have dropped everything and driven straight to their house. But tonight was different. Tonight I felt a quiet steadiness humming under my ribs. They no longer had the power to summon me. But I knew I had to face them. Avoiding the inevitable wouldn't undo the damage. And part of reclaiming myself meant staring the truth in the face, even when the truth came dressed as my mother's anger and my father's disappointment. I grabbed my keys and drove. Their house was only 20 minutes away, but the entire drive felt like wading through memory. Every street corner held a remnant of my childhood, a reminder of the girl who tried so hard to be seen by people who refused to look at her without comparing her to Ivy. But those memories felt distant now, like scenes from a movie I had once acted in, but no longer remembered the lines to. When I pulled into the driveway, both of them were already waiting behind the front window, two silhouettes against warm light, stiff as sentries. As I walked up the steps, the door swung open before I even reached it. My mother didn't greet me. She didn't ask how I was. She stepped back just enough to let me in, her lips thin, her eyes sharp. Sit, she ordered, pointing to the living room couch as if I were a disobedient teenager. My father sat in his recliner, elbows on his knees, mouth drawn into a grim line. These were familiar positions: mother, the prosecutor; father, the judge. I sat. My mother started first. She always did. What did you say to your sister? She demanded, crossing her arms. She came home hysterical. Completely hysterical. My father added, You frightened her, Harper. That's not acceptable. I stared at them for a long moment before responding. What she did to me is what's unacceptable. My mother scoffed. Oh, please, don't dramatize. She made a mistake. She committed fraud, I corrected quietly. Multiple counts. She's family, my father snapped. Family makes mistakes. Family forgives. Family doesn't steal, I said, my voice low but steady. Family doesn't drain your accounts or forge your name on loan applications. Family doesn't force you into signing away everything you've worked for. My mother's expression twisted into something between annoyance and disdain. Here we go. The martyr act. I blinked at her. Martyr act. Yes, she said, leaning forward. You always make yourself the victim. Everything is always so hard for poor Harper. Look at you. A mansion. A company. A car that costs more than most people make in a year. And still you act like you're suffering. Something hot flashed under my skin. I didn't get any of that from you, I said. I earned all of it. My father bristled. You're ungrateful. No, I said softly. I'm tired. That made them pause. But only for a moment. My mother waved her hand dismissively. Your sister needs help. She's drowning in debt. She is one crisis away from losing everything. She wouldn't be drowning if she stopped burning every bridge she crosses, I replied. My father's jaw tightened. You're older. You're successful. It's your responsibility to support her. There it was. The script they had been reciting my entire life. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of years settle into clarity. No, I said. My responsibility is to myself, to protect what I built, and to protect myself from people who exploit me. My mother stood as well. So you're just going to abandon her, your own sister? She abandoned me first, I said, a long time ago. They didn't want to hear that. They didn't want to hear anything that didn't paint Ivy as the fragile baby bird who needed constant care. My father exhaled harshly. Look, we've talked it over, and the best solution is simple. You sign the papers Ivy gave you. The house should go to the family, not just you. I stared at him, unblinking. The house belongs to me. I paid for it. He shook his head. You wouldn't have been able to afford it without our support growing up. I studied him, searching his face for anything resembling understanding, but there was nothing. Only expectation. Harper, my mother said, softening her voice with a practiced gentleness she used, when she wanted to manipulate me, you don't want to tear this family apart. Just sign the agreement. Keep the peace. I smiled then, not out of amusement but out of recognition. This was the moment, the exact point in the path where versions of myself used to split, the obedient daughter who would fold, or the woman I had finally become. I already did sign the papers, I said calmly. My mother's eyes lit up. Good, then Ivy will finally wait. Her smile faltered. Why is she so upset then? What did you say to her? I took a slow breath. The papers she forced me to sign are worthless. My father scowled. Worthless? The trust holds everything I said. The house, the investments, the estate. None of it belongs to me personally. I can't legally transfer what I don't own. The silence that followed was loud enough to shake the walls. My mother's lips parted. You put everything in a trust 2 years ago. Why, she whispered. Because of moments exactly like this, I replied. My father rose abruptly, face reddening. You tricked us. No, I said. I protected myself. You tried to manipulate me into giving up everything I spent a decade building. I did what I needed to do. My mother stepped forward. You selfish girl. You always think you're better than us. Always hiding things. Always keeping secrets. You taught me to keep secrets, I said. You taught me that my successes made you uncomfortable, that I should dim myself so Ivy could shine. That's not true, she snapped. It is, I whispered. And you know it. My father jabbed a finger toward me. You will fix this. You will give your sister something. No, I said firmly. She gets nothing from me now. Not money, not access, not trust. My mother's voice turned sharp. Then you are no longer welcome here. I breathed in slowly, letting the words settle, letting them lose their sting. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel gutted by their rejection. I felt free. I think I said gently, I've never been welcome here as myself, only as who you wanted me to be. My father glared. My mother shook her head, pacing. You're making a huge mistake, she said. We won't stand with you on this. We'll support Ivy. I nodded. You always have. My mother stared at me, then something shifting behind her eyes, not regret, but surprise, as if she didn't recognize the woman standing in front of her. Harper? When did you become so cold? I smiled faintly. When I stopped letting you warm yourselves with my fire. She inhaled sharply. I stepped back toward the door. I'm not cutting ties, I said quietly, but I am drawing lines, boundaries, ones you cannot cross anymore. My father scoffed. You think you can just walk away? I'm not walking away, I said. I'm walking toward something better. Neither of them followed me to the door. Neither tried to stop me. They simply stood there, two people who had once shaped me, now diminished by their own refusal to see who I had become. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my skin like a blessing. The weight in my chest loosened. The tightness in my throat dissolved. My phone buzzed. Alden, ready when you are. I looked back at the house one last time, the fading porch light, the closed curtains, the shadows of my parents moving behind glass. A place built on unspoken rules and unequal love. A place I had long outgrown. I walked down the steps, each movement lighter than the last. By the time I reached my car, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Myself. When I pulled onto the road, leaving their house dark behind me, a quiet truth settled over me like a warm blanket. Breaking away isn't betrayal. Sometimes it's survival. And tonight I finally chose myself. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was upset, but because something in me felt sharper, clearer, more awake than it had in years. I walked through the halls of my home long after midnight barefoot, the silence pressing gently around me like a reassurance. Every lamp I passed cast a warm circle of light, and each one reminded me of something simple yet revolutionary. This was my space, my sanctuary. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for owning it. The next morning, I woke early. I hadn't meant to, but the sun found me anyway, slipping between the curtains and brushing across my face. I stretched, exhaled, and sat up. Today felt like the beginning of something not dramatic, not loud, but quietly powerful. In the kitchen, I brewed coffee and pulled out my laptop. There were spreadsheets to review, documents to revise, emails to send. For weeks, I had been just functional enough to maintain my business while navigating Ivy's chaos and my parents' demands. But today, I felt my professional rhythm returning. I felt myself returning. I had just finished reviewing a supplier contract when my phone rang. It was Paige. "Morning," she said when I answered. "You sound awake. I wasn't sure if you'd still be processing everything." "I processed," I said. "Now I'm moving forward." "Good," she replied, her voice warm, "because we've got a packed day." I blinked. "We do." "Oh yes," she said, shuffling papers. "For one, the annual board meeting is next week. We need to finalize the projection reports. And second big one, you forgot, the investor luncheon is today." I frowned. "Investor luncheon. Yes," she said slowly. "The one you rescheduled twice. The one where you present the expansion plans." "Oh," I breathed. "Right. That." "You ready?" she asked. I paused, looking around my home, the tall windows, the light pouring in, the quiet strength humming through every room. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." An hour later, I stood in my closet, pulling out a soft beige blouse and tailored slate slacks. I fastened a delicate gold necklace, swept my hair into a clean, low bun, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back didn't look like someone who had been emotionally ambushed by her own family. She looked composed, capable, someone who built something out of nothing and refused to apologize for it. The drive downtown was smooth traffic light, the city alive with early energy. When I pulled into the private parking lot of the event venue, a sleek high-rise with glass walls and warm wood accents, I felt a small flicker of nerves. Not because of the investors, but because today symbolized stepping back into my power. Inside the conference room, everything was pristine and professional: white linens, crystal glasses, folders arranged neatly in front of each chair. It smelled faintly of citrus and wood polish. A woman from the event staff greeted me and led me to the front, where the head investor, a man named Grant Williamson, was reviewing notes. He looked up when I approached. "Ms. Harper Dawson," he said with an appreciative nod. "Good to see you." "Likewise," I answered warmly. "I read the preliminary projections," he said, tapping the file. "If your final plan looks half as strong as these numbers, I'd say you're positioned beautifully for expansion." "Thank you," I said simply, but inside a small spark of pride burned bright. As the rest of the team assembled, I took my seat and opened my folder. The meeting flowed smoothly: charts, financial breakdowns, potential site locations, risk assessments. I spoke with clarity, answering questions with precision. The more I spoke, the more grounded I felt. This was my world, my strength. My identity, not the daughter expected to carry her family's burdens, not the sister coerced into sacrifice, but the woman who built her own empire brick by brick. Midway through the Q&A session, Grant leaned forward. "Harper, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Your company has grown consistently for years," he said. "But these last 6 months, something shifted. You've been bolder, more decisive. Like you're playing offense instead of defense. What changed? What changed Ivy? My parents, the papers, the betrayal, the trust. The moment I signed a document designed to destroy me and felt nothing but a strange, icy calm. The moment I realized I didn't need to beg anyone to love me. But I couldn't say that. So I smiled gently and said, life presented challenges that forced me to become clearer about what I wanted. Grant nodded. Whatever happened, it worked. You're sharper, more confident. And in that moment, I realized he was right. My voice had changed. My posture had changed. My presence had changed. When the meeting ended, Grant walked me to the elevator. I'll send you the updated documents tonight, I said. Looking forward to it, he replied. Then softer. You're doing extraordinary work, Harper. Don't let anyone dim that. Those words hit deeper than he knew. When the elevator doors closed, the reflection staring back at me was one of a woman reclaiming her life piece by piece. Back at my car, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Today had gone well, very well. It was the first day in weeks that felt purely mine, but the universe wasn't about to let me leave the moment untouched. As I unlocked my car, a familiar voice echoed from behind me. Well, well, look who's suddenly too busy for her own family. I froze. My hand tightened around my keys. I turned slowly. And there she was. Ivy, leaning casually against a concrete column in her oversized sunglasses and designer jacket, the same jacket she'd bought with my money. Her arms were crossed and her mouth curled into that same mocking smirk she always used when she wanted to get under my skin. "What are you doing here?" I asked, voice flat. "Oh, relax," she said, pushing off the column. "I'm not here to fight. I just wanted to talk." "Talk," I repeated. "Yes," she said, sauntering closer. "You know, sister to sister." The last time she said those words, she was shoving fraudulent documents in my face. I kept my distance. "What do you want, Ivy?" She sighed dramatically. "Mom and Dad are furious with you. That's not my concern." "It should be," she snapped. "Family is supposed to come first. Family doesn't coerce signatures or drain bank accounts." She rolled her eyes. "God, you're still stuck on that. You have money, Harper. You always have money. And somehow you still act like I stole your last loaf of bread." "What you stole," I said quietly, "was trust." That stopped her for a second. Just a second. Then she huffed. "Whatever. The point is, we need to fix this." "We," I echoed. "Yes, we. You think you can just cut ties and everyone will dance around you? No. That's not how family works." "No," I corrected. "That's not how manipulation works." She stiffened. Her painted smile faltered. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think you've won. You haven't. You're alone, Harper. You've always been alone. And without us, you will crumble." Those words would have destroyed the younger version of me, the girl desperate for approval. But today they felt like a final confirmation that I had made the right choices. I stepped forward until we were shoulder to shoulder, and softly, calmly I said, "I don't crumble anymore, Ivy." Her jaw clenched. I walked past her, opened my car door, and paused. "One more thing," I said, turning back. "Don't follow me again. And don't show up at my meetings. My patience is gone. And legally speaking, you're on thin ice." Her expression flickered, fear, then anger, then something wounded. "You're not the only one who can play games," she whispered. "I don't play games," I said. "I rebuild my life." Before she could respond, I got into the car, closed the door, and drove off. She stayed in the rearview mirror for a long time, small, shaking, seething. But the farther I drove, the smaller she became. By the time I reached the highway, she was nothing but a fading shadow behind me. Nothing but a reminder of who I would never let myself become. And every mile forward felt like a reclamation. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, the sky was washed in soft orange long shadows, stretching across the lawn like worn ribbons. It should have been peaceful. It should have felt like coming home. but the moment I stepped out of the car, a tightness wrapped itself around my ribs. Something felt off. I walked toward the front door, and that's when I saw it, an envelope, thick and cream-colored, sitting on the welcome mat like a carefully placed insult. There was no stamp, no mailing label, just my name written in looping script I recognized instantly. Ivy. I didn't pick it up right away. I stood there for a moment staring at it, feeling the old anxiety try to claw its way up my throat. She always did this, dropping emotional landmines at my feet and expecting me to step on them. Finally, I bent down and picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive faux elegance, the kind she loved. I tore the flap open gently and slid out the contents, a handwritten letter and a glossy photograph of her with my parents at dinner, smiling arms, intertwined wine glasses raised in a toast. She chose the photo intentionally. I felt the sting before I even read the first line of her letter. "Harper," it began, "we need to end this nonsense. Need to... You're blowing everything out of proportion. Mom and Dad think you're losing sight of what matters. We're waiting for you to come to your senses." I exhaled slowly and leaned against the doorframe, scanning the rest of the page. It was exactly what I expected: guilt, blame, entitlement, and a thinly veiled plea coded in superiority. She wrote that she loved me, but that I was too emotional. That families fight, but real sisters don't let something trivial ruin everything. That I should apologize for misunderstanding her intentions. And at the end, a final line underlined twice: "Come back to the family before it's too late." I almost laughed. Too late for what? Too late for her to keep using me. Too late for them to continue molding me into the obedient daughter who never said no. I folded the letter neatly, walked inside, and put it straight into the shredder. The whir of the machine, as the blades sliced through her words, felt cleansing. I took a deep breath, letting the sound fade, and walked into the kitchen. The house was quiet, but a comforting quiet, the kind that let my shoulders drop a little, the kind that felt earned. Just as I poured myself a glass of water, my phone buzzed. Alden. My pulse steadied. His messages always grounded me. "Need an update," he wrote. I typed back, "Come over." He arrived 20 minutes later, tall, composed, and carrying a briefcase stuffed with documents. He stepped inside, took one look at my expression, and said, "I'm guessing things escalated." I handed him Ivy's letter. He skimmed it with a single raised brow. "This is nothing short of emotional extortion wrapped in stationery." "It's standard, Ivy," I replied. "It's also another piece of evidence," he said, adding it to his folder. "The more she reveals her intent, the better for us." I sank into a chair at the island. I feel crazy for needing evidence against my own sister. "You're not crazy," he said, sitting across from me. "You're protecting yourself, something she and your parents have never done for you." I looked down at the counter. "She followed me today, showed up at my investor meeting." Alden stiffened. "She what?" She cornered me in the parking garage. His jaw flexed. "Did she threaten you?" "Not directly," I said, "but she made her intentions very clear." He set his pen down. "Then it's time to tighten the boundaries even further. I'll file an official notice of harassment first thing tomorrow." I rubbed my temples. "I hate that it's come to this." He softened. "Harper, they attacked your livelihood, your safety, your future. You didn't escalate." "They did." I nodded slowly, letting his words ground me. We reviewed more documents, account summaries, trust protections, legal strategies, until the shadows outside deepened and the room filled with the golden hush of evening. Eventually, I walked him to the door. As he stepped outside, he paused. "You're doing better than you think," he said quietly. I swallowed. "It doesn't feel like it." "It will," he said, "especially when the consequences begin to settle where they belong." When he left, I stood at the doorway a moment longer, letting the night breeze wash over me. For a brief second I felt steady again, but that didn't last. Half an hour later, as I was closing the curtains in the living room, I saw movement at the edge of my property. A figure, standing under the street lamp, still as stone. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer to the window, careful not to be seen. The figure moved into the light. My father. He wasn't walking toward the house. He wasn't knocking. He was just staring up at it, at me. An icy shiver crawled up my spine. I opened the door a crack. "Dad," he didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply said, "We raised you better than this." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing down the sidewalk like a ghost swallowed by the night. I shut the door and leaned against it, my breath shaky. My father wasn't a dramatic man. He wasn't someone who stood outside houses like an omen. But tonight, he acted like someone grieving a daughter who had stepped out of line. Except I wasn't stepping out of line. I was stepping out of a cage. I spent the rest of the evening pacing through my home. The encounter had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. Ivy's letter was predictable. My mother's scolding message didn't surprise me. But my father, showing up silently in the dark, that was new. And it felt like a warning. Before going to bed, I double-checked the locks. Then I installed the updated security protocol Alden had sent me: new access codes, restricted entry zones, motion camera activation. By the time I finally lay down, exhaustion had wrapped itself around me like a heavy quilt. But sleep didn't come. Because something deep inside me whispered that the storm wasn't over. It was just gathering force. And it hit the next morning. At 7:12 a.m., I woke to pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. I jolted upright, adrenaline rushing through my veins. When I opened the door, 3 uniformed officers stood on my porch. "Ms. Harper Dawson," one asked. "Yes," I said, heart hammering. "Is something wrong?" "You've been reported for property theft," the officer said, "by your sister, Ivy Dawson. She claims you unlawfully removed items belonging to her from this property during an altercation." My jaw dropped. "What? That's not. This is my home." "Yes, ma'am," he said, professionally. "But we're required to follow up on all reports." "She's lying," I said, my voice tightening. "We're beginning to suspect that," the officer replied calmly. "But we still need to verify your statement and see inside." I stepped aside. "Come in." The officers walked through the entryway, glancing around. There was nothing out of place. Nothing belonging to Ivy. Nothing that supported her claim. After a short inspection, the lead officer returned to me. "Thank you for cooperating. We'll document this as a false report. Do you want to file a counterclaim?" I hesitated, because filing a counterclaim against my own sister felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But then I remembered Ivy's letter, her ambush at my meeting, her following me, my father standing like a sentinel in the dark. And I remembered the trust I had spent years building, brick by brick, being threatened by their greed and arrogance. "Yes," I said finally, "I want to file." The officer nodded and scribbled it down. "We'll process it immediately." When the officers left, I sat on the staircase, my hands trembling just slightly. Because this was no longer sibling drama, this was a war Ivy had started, and I was done pretending it wasn't. I picked up my phone and dialed Alden. He answered on the first ring. "Harper." "She filed a police report," I said, claiming I stole from her. He swore under his breath. "I'll get the paperwork ready. And Harper." "Yes." "This confirms something important," he said. "She's unraveling, and people who are unraveling tend to get reckless." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "I know," I whispered. "Then it's time," he said. "Time to end this properly." I opened my eyes, feeling something settle inside me, something firm, cold, and unshakable. "Yes," I said. "Let's finish this." Because now it wasn't just about protecting my home. It was about protecting my future. And Ivy had just handed me every reason I needed. The morning after the police visit, I woke with a clarity that felt almost foreign. No heaviness, no hovering dread, just a steady simmering determination threading through every part of me. I showered, dressed in tailored black slacks and a soft ivory blouse, and tied my hair back. I looked like a woman preparing for a war she intended to win. While brewing coffee, my phone buzzed with a message from Alden. Be at my office by 9. Bring nothing but yourself. I've handled the rest. I stared at the text for a moment, breathing slowly. Then I slipped on my coat, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. The air outside was crisp and cool, a thin mist still hugging the ground like morning uncertainty refusing to lift. But I felt steady, anchored in a way I hadn't felt in years. Driving across the city past tree-lined streets and busy intersections, I realized something I no longer feared what Ivy or my parents could do. What frightened me was what they had already done. When I stepped into Alden's office building, a sleek structure of dark glass and polished steel, the receptionist greeted me with a knowing nod. "He's expecting you, Ms. Dawson." "Thank you," I murmured, walking toward the elevator. Inside the elevator, I watched my reflection in the mirrored wall. My expression was calm, but my heart thudded with that familiar mix of resolve and sorrow. Not because I doubted what I was doing, but because no part of me had ever wanted to fight my family in the first place. But they had turned themselves into adversaries, and I had no choice but to defend myself. When I entered Alden's office, he stood up immediately, motioning me toward the conference table. "We have a lot to review," he said, "and even more to plan." "What happened?" I asked, taking a seat. He slid a thick file across the table toward me. "Your sister wasn't satisfied with filing a false police report. She attempted to access your business accounts last night." My pulse kicked. "What? She tried and failed to hack into your financial platform using your old credentials. Unsuccessfully thanks to your updated security." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "She's spiraling." "That's putting it mildly," he said, flipping open the file. "Ivy and your parents are becoming desperate. Desperation leads to stupidity. Stupidity leaves evidence." He tapped the folder. "And we are collecting every drop of it." I leaned forward. "What's the plan?" His voice was cool, methodical, unwavering. "We're going to let them continue, not to the point of danger, but enough to solidify the case. Meanwhile, we prepare for the real strike." I exhaled slowly. "Which is, we finalize the revocation notices, freeze any shared entries they may have had access to in the past, and file a petition for a formal harassment order. Then, we prepare for civil damages." My throat tightened. "Against my own family. Against the people hurting you," he corrected softly. "Blood doesn't excuse abuse, and it certainly doesn't entitle them to your livelihood." He wasn't wrong. Still, my stomach twisted at the thought of seeing Ivy's face in court, her indignation, her feigned innocence, my parents' simmering disappointment. "You're hesitating," he observed gently. "I'm thinking," I said. "Just thinking." He folded his hands. "Harper, I need you to understand something. What you're doing isn't vindictive, it's protective. These people, your sister included, feel entitled to your success. They will keep taking until you stop them." I nodded slowly. "I know. They've proven that." He softened. "And you're doing the right thing, even if it doesn't feel like it yet." Before I could respond, Alden's assistant knocked lightly and stepped inside. "Mr. Hale," she said, "we have a situation." He stiffened. "What kind of situation?" She held up a tablet. "You should see this." He took it from her, his eyebrows knitting together the moment he hit play. Then he turned the screen toward me. It was a video, a live stream, from Ivy. She was sitting in her car, false tears streaking her cheeks, mascara smudged dramatically. Her voice trembled with practiced fragility. "My sister," she said, sniffing loudly, "has abandoned our family. She's turned her back on us. She told the police lies about me. She's letting her lawyer destroy us. I've tried everything to reach her, but she refuses to listen. Please, please pray for my family during this difficult time." My jaw tightened. She was playing the victim. To her followers, to the community, to anyone willing to believe her. And the comments, good Lord, the comments were pouring in below the video. "No sister should act like that. Harper sounds selfish. Stay strong, Ivy. This is heartbreaking." A heat rose in my chest, not embarrassment, not anger, resolve. Alden paused the video. She is attempting public manipulation, standard tactic for someone who feels the walls closing in. I'm not letting her use me for sympathy, I said. He nodded. Good. Because we're about to put her in a position where no sympathy will save her. He pushed a new stack of documents toward me. Everything is ready. You just need to sign. I lifted the pen hand steady, and as ink touched paper, a strange calm washed over me. It was the calm of acceptance, the calm of someone stepping into the storm willingly knowing she had prepared for every possible strike. At the bottom of the final sheet, I signed my name with the same deliberate grace I used when signing major business deals. When I slid the pen back, Alden said, "It's done. Ivy will receive formal notice within 48 hours. I knotted my throat tight but firm. Good. But this wasn't over. Not yet. On the drive home, my thoughts were a whirlwind memories flashing like old film clips. Ivy as a child clinging to my hand. Ivy as a teenager slamming doors. Ivy at 22 asking for a loan she never repaid. Ivy at 28 crying about her breakup while I canceled meetings to comfort her. And Ivy yesterday shoving fraudulent documents in my face telling me to sign or get out. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the culmination of years of silent entitlement finally taking shape. When I arrived home, I walked straight to my office, opened my laptop, and began pulling up every account, every asset, every protection I had meticulously chained together over the years. I reviewed the trust structure again, reading every clause, every safeguard. Not because I doubted Alden's work, but because seeing it with my own eyes made me feel anchored. As I scrolled, something caught my attention. A notification on my home security system. Motion detected West Side Gate. I froze. I clicked the surveillance feed. And there she was. Ivy, standing at the gate. Not crying, not hysterical. Cold, still, waiting. Her eyes lifted directly toward the camera. And when she realized I was watching, she smiled a slow, unsettling smile. Then she turned and walked away. Not running, not sneaking, walking, as if she wanted me to know she could show up whenever she wished. A thin thread of unease wound its way through my spine. I locked the gate remotely and activated the enhanced perimeter sensors. For a moment, I stood in the center of my office, heart pounding. Not out of fear, but out of the sheer oddity of it all. Showing up silently in the dark was something my father would do. Smiling at my security cameras. That was Ivy. But something told me she wasn't just spiraling anymore. She was planning. And that meant I had to be sharper than ever. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed staring out at the backyard illuminated softly by landscape lights. Everything looked peaceful. Still. But I knew better than to believe peace meant safety. The truth was simple. A person who feels entitled will always escalate when faced with consequences. Ivy was escalating, but so was I. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't wavering. I wasn't the girl who used to bend until she broke. I lay back against my pillows, pulled the comforter up, and whispered into the quiet room, "Let's finish this." Because now it was my turn to choose the battlefield. I woke before dawn to the shrill chime of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. For a moment I didn't move. I lay there in the dark, the soft gray light creeping across the ceiling, trying to convince myself this was just a normal morning. But nothing about my life had been normal for weeks. The phone buzzed again, and I finally reached for it. Paige. My stomach tightened. She never called this early. I answered. "What's wrong?" Her voice came out fast, almost breathless. "Harper, don't panic, okay? But you need to see this." She texted me a link before I could ask. I sat up, turned on the lamp, and opened it. A video. Another video. This time, not Ivy crying in her car. This one was filmed inside my old neighborhood community center, the place where my parents volunteered for fundraising events. There were folding chairs set up in a circle, a handful of people murmuring quietly, and in the middle of the frame, my mother, and Ivy, and my father, all looking very solemn. A banner behind them read, "Family Support Forum, Healing Through Truth." My mother stepped to the microphone, her expression painted with a mixture of sorrow and dignified suffering. Thank you all for coming, she began. We're here today because our family is going through something very painful. Our eldest daughter, Harper, is in crisis. I felt the air leave my lungs. She continued steady and somber. She has isolated herself, pushed us away, refused help, and recently she's begun making false accusations against her own sister. My father nodded gravely beside her. Then Ivy stepped forward looking fragile, wounded, a trembling hand clutching a tissue. I love my sister, she whispered into the microphone. I always have. But she's not well. She thinks we're trying to steal from her. She says we're stalking her. She filed harassment paperwork. Her voice cracked. Against her own family. A sympathetic gasp rippled through the room. Paige's voice returned through the phone. The video's going viral in the local community groups. People are sharing it like wildfire. They're framing you as unstable, paranoid, controlling. I pressed a hand to my forehead. They staged an intervention without me. They staged a public performance, she corrected. They're trying to get ahead of the legal notices Alden is sending. They're trying to shape the narrative. I sat in silence, my breath trembling. Paige's voice softened. Harper. You okay? No, I whispered. I'm angry. And I was, not shattered, not afraid, just bone-deep angry. Because this wasn't just manipulation, this was character assassination. I ended the call with Paige, took a quick shower dressed in a fitted black blazer and boots, and drove straight to Alden's office, with an adrenaline-fueled clarity I hadn't felt in days. When I burst through the door, he looked up from his desk and immediately closed the folder he was reading. You saw, he said. Yes, I replied, dropping into the seat across from him. They're painting me as unstable. They're saying I'm having a breakdown. Alden leaned back, his jaw tight. It's a tactic we predicted. They want sympathy. They want to undermine your credibility before the legal proceedings. It's working, I said. People are commenting. I'm getting messages from old neighbors asking if I'm all right. They're trying to socially isolate me. And we're going to stop them, he said firmly. I met his eyes. How he opened his laptop and angled the screen toward me. By showing the truth, controlled, precise, and legally sound, not emotional, not reactive. He typed quickly, and a new file appeared, a digital catalog of evidence. Security footage of Ivy entering my property at night. Screenshots of her attempts to access my business accounts. Bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals. Loan applications tied to my stolen information. Records of the false police report. And finally, the live stream of their family support forum. Once this is filed, Alden said their credibility evaporates. Completely. I exhaled slowly, my heartbeat steadying. And he added, we escalate the harassment petition to include both your parents. That stilled me. My parents. My voice was quiet, almost fragile. Yes, he said. They are actively participating in a campaign to defame you. That is harassment. That is emotional coercion. And that is unacceptable. A tear pricked behind my eyes, not sadness. Relief. I've spent my whole life trying to make them proud, I whispered. Trying to keep the peace, he corrected. But peace without boundaries isn't peace, it's submission. I nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. He closed the laptop. Now we need one more thing from you. What? The truth, he said gently. Not the truth they twisted. Your truth. And we're going to put it on record. He placed a voice recorder on the table. And for the first time in years, someone asked me to speak, not to defend, not to justify, but to be heard. I took a deep breath. And I told the story. I told him everything, the years of small manipulations, the financial burden, the emotional guilt, the favoritism that grew like mold in the corners of my childhood. I told him about Ivy's entitlement, my parents' demands the moment they confronted me with fraudulent papers. I spoke until my throat ached and my hands trembled. When I finished, Alden didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat with it, letting the weight of my words settle. Finally, he said, I'm sorry. I looked up. For what they took from you, he said. For how long you've carried this without support. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thank you. He gave a small nod, then turned professional again. I'll send everything to the judge by end of day. But now comes the part you won't enjoy. I sighed. What now? You need to stay calm, he said. They will escalate again. They always escalate before collapse. He was right. And collapse was coming. When I left the office, I didn't go home. I drove to the cliffs overlooking the ocean, my place of quiet, thinking the one spot in the world where I felt untethered from my family's expectations. The waves crashed hard against the rocks, steady and relentless, and the air tasted clean. I stood there for nearly an hour, letting the ocean wind whip through my hair, letting the salt sting my eyes just enough to blur the horizon. It was the first moment in weeks where I allowed myself to feel the grief beneath the anger. Grief for the sister I wished Ivy had been. Grief for the parents I never truly had. Grief for a lifetime of trying to earn love from people who were incapable of seeing me as anything but a resource. When I finally drove home, twilight had softened the sky into muted lavender and rose. The entire neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. But that peace shattered the moment I turned into my driveway. Trash, glass, debris. Someone had attacked my front yard. My garden pots were smashed, my mailbox ripped from its hinges. The front path littered with broken shards of ceramic. And spray-painted in thick black letters across my garage door were the words, "Selfish Traitor." I slammed the car door and ran forward, fury burning through every vein. My hands shook. My breath came out fast and uneven. This wasn't just harassment. This was escalation, violence, punishment, retaliation for choosing myself. Before I could even process the full shock of it, motion lights flickered on from a neighbor's yard. Mrs. Landry, an older woman who lived across the street, hurried over clutching her robe. "Oh, Harper," she said, wringing her hands. "I'm so sorry. I called the police already. I didn't see who did it, but I heard shouting." 2 women. One of them sounded like your sister. My stomach dropped. Of course. Of course Ivy would do this. The desperation, the entitlement, the fury. It had all been building toward something like this. By the time the police arrived, my hands were steadier, but my resolve had sharpened to something blade-like. I gave my statement clearly, calmly. The officers took photos, documented evidence, examined the security footage from my cameras, and there it was. Ivy and my mother. In the middle of the night, destroying my property. My breath left my body in a hollow exhale. My mother. My mother had participated. The officer looked at me sympathetically. "This is enough for charges." I nodded, numb. "File them." When the patrol cars finally left and the street settled back into silence, I stood alone in the driveway staring at the vandalism. The black paint on the garage door glistened under the streetlight like an open wound. Selfish traitor. A laugh escaped me, then a soft disbelieving sound. Because for the first time I realized those words weren't insults, they were confessions. Confessions that I was no longer under their control, confessions that I had broken free of their expectations, confessions that I had become someone they could no longer manipulate. I was selfish. For the first time in my life, I belonged to myself. I was a traitor. To the version of me who kept forgiving the unforgivable. I turned away from the ruined doorway, walked into my house, and locked the door behind me. And in the silence of my foyer, I whispered, "They can vandalize the walls. They will never touch the foundation." Because the foundation was me. And I was done breaking. The morning after the vandalism felt unnaturally still, as if the house itself was waiting to see what I would do next. I walked through each room slowly, letting my fingertips brush along the familiar surfaces. My oak dining table, the marble kitchen island, the banister I had chosen for its smooth curve. Everything inside was untouched, safe, mine. But the damage outside still clung to me like smoke. The words on the garage door, "Selfish traitor," flickered behind my eyelids every time I blinked. And beneath the shock, beneath the anger, beneath the grief, something else had settled into me overnight. Resolve, cold and steady. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't reasoning or negotiating or begging them to see me. I was done with that. At 8:03 a.m., my phone rang. Alden, I answered immediately. They came onto my property, I said without greeting. I have them on footage. Ivy and my mother. I saw the police upload, he replied. I'm already drafting the next set of filings. Today everything accelerates. Good, I murmured. Did they damage anything inside the home? No. Just the yard, the mailbox, planters, and the garage door. Symbolic damage, he said. This wasn't an impulse, it was a message. I closed my eyes. I know. And we'll respond, he said firmly. Today, I'll file for an emergency protective order. Given their escalation, the judge is likely to approve it. A pause. Harper, he added quietly, I need you to understand that once this goes through, things will change permanently between you and your family. My throat tightened. They already have, I whispered. He didn't argue. Come to the office at 10, he said. We'll finalize everything. After hanging up, I stepped onto the back balcony with a cup of tea, trying to ground myself. The garden was peaceful, washed gold by the morning light dew shimmering on the grass. For a moment I wondered how a place so serene could be the same one defaced only hours ago. I sat on the outdoor bench and let the quiet settle around me. But it didn't last. At 8:26 a.m., the front gate intercom chimed. Ms. Dawson, the security system announced your sister Ivy is requesting entry. My grip tightened on my mug. I walked inside, pressed the gate camera button, and there she was, standing in the same spot she had stood yesterday, but this time her expression was wild, hair unbrushed, eyes red, like she hadn't slept. I didn't speak. She slammed her palm against the gate. Harper, open the damn gate. We need to talk. No, I said calmly. We don't. Don't do this, she shouted. You can't call the police on your own family. You forced me to, I replied. Now leave. I'm not leaving, she screamed. You owe us. You owe me. You ruined my life. I'm hanging up, I said. You ruined everything, she shrieked. You think you're better than us. I pressed the disconnect button and cut the feed. The silence afterward was absolute and strangely beautiful. I locked the perimeter, activated the enhanced protocol, and walked away. At 10 sharp, I walked into Alden's office. He stood when I entered. We're ready. Good, I said, sitting across from him. He slid 3 documents toward me. Here's the protective order, the civil suit expansion, and the trust reinforcement addendum. Sign all 3. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake, not even a little. As I signed, he reviewed the surveillance stills from last night. Your mother looks unwell. She's angry I stopped being obedient. He nodded slowly. Sometimes boundaries feel like betrayal to those who benefited from your lack of them. I finished the last signature and leaned back. What happens next? I asked. Next, he said, they receive official notice. A sheriff will deliver it personally. Ivy won't be allowed within 500 feet of your home or workplace. Neither will your parents. I swallowed. And when they violate it, then they face arrest. The word arrest echoed in my mind like a bell struck in a cathedral. It felt too harsh. It felt too justified. He closed the folder. One more thing. I looked up. I need to prepare you. People like your sister do not accept consequences quietly. She will react emotionally, dramatically, possibly publicly. I exhaled. Of course she will. But he said gently, that's why we've built a case so airtight she can scream into the void, and nothing will touch you. A knock interrupted us. His assistant peeked inside. Mr. Hale, the sheriff's office, confirmed delivery in 30 minutes. Ivy would receive the documents in 30 minutes. My parents in 35. The shift in my life would become real in less than an hour. As we wrapped up, Alden walked me to the elevator. Harper, he said, lowering his voice. You've done the hard part. Now trust the process. I do. And he added, trust yourself. I nodded, stepped into the elevator and pressed the ground floor button. My phone buzzed before the doors closed. A message. From an unknown number. The text read, "You're destroying the family. Hope you're proud." Another one followed seconds later. "This is all your fault." Then another. "How could you do this to your own sister?" I blocked the number without hesitating. Then another message appeared from a different number. This one was only 3 words. "You'll regret this." I blocked that one too. Outside the building, the afternoon sun was bright enough to make me squint. I put on my sunglasses, walked toward my car, and inhaled deeply. The air smelled clean, crisp, like something washed away overnight. Halfway home, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail from Mrs. Landry across the street. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle. "Just wanted you to know I saw a sheriff's car stop by your parents' place. And then Ivy's. They didn't look happy. But you did the right thing. Don't doubt it." My chest loosened. When I arrived home, the first thing I noticed was the sheriff's car turning out of my neighborhood. A deputy nodded as he passed me. It was done. I parked in my driveway, stepped out, and stared at the faint outlines of the graffiti still visible on the garage door. The cleaning crew would arrive later, but for now, the ghost of the words hung there like a fading bruise. I walked inside, set my purse down, and exhaled. An hour passed in silence, then 2, then 3. And just when I thought maybe, just maybe the day would end quietly, the pounding started. Hard, violent. I froze. It was the front door. I walked slowly toward it, heart steady but alert. I looked through the peephole. My mother. She looked furious. Her face was blotchy eyes, wild hair, wind-tangled like she'd rushed over the moment she received the order. "Open this door, right now," she screamed. "I didn't," she pounded again. "You ungrateful child, after everything we did for you." I spoke through the door. "You need to leave. You've been served. You're violating the protective order." "I don't care about your paperwork," she shrieked. "You think you can arrest your own mother?" "Yes," I said calmly, "if you force me to." "You're dead to us," she screamed. "Do you hear me? You're dead to us." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "Then go." There was a stunned silence. Then she screamed something unintelligible and stormed off. As soon as she left the property line, my legs finally gave out, and I sank to the foyer floor. Not crying, not shaking, just letting the silence settle around me like a blanket. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Alden, again. I saw the alert, he said. "Your mother violated the order. Do you want to press charges?" I stared at the closed door. At the lock, I had installed myself. At the evidence that they no longer had access to my life. And softly, clearly, firmly, I said no, not tonight. "She's been warned. But next time, yes." "Understood," he said. When I hung up, the house was so still I could hear my heartbeat. I pressed my palm against the cool tile of the foyer and let the moment wash over me. This was the cost of choosing myself. This was the price of freedom. And yet, I felt lighter than I had in years, because for the first time, the chaos wasn't inside my home. It was outside, and it couldn't touch me anymore. When I finally stood, walked to the living room window and looked at the quiet street beyond, I felt something settle into place inside me. Not peace, not yet, but strength. And strength was enough to get me through the next storm. Because I knew another one was coming. The day after my mother violated the protective order began with a ringing phone and a sense of finality humming in the air, as if the universe had quietly decided this was the morning everything would turn. I reached for the phone, half expecting more vitriol, more accusations, more desperate attempts to claw at my boundaries, but the caller ID surprised me. "Sheriff's Department." My stomach tightened, but I answered. "This is Harper. Ms. Dawson, this is Deputy Collins. We're calling to confirm that Ms. Ivy Dawson has been formally notified of the protective order and the pending charges related to the vandalism on your property." My breath caught. "My sister." "Acknowledged it, she did," the deputy said. "But ma'am, I should inform you she did not take it well." I closed my eyes. I figured. She became extremely agitated. We advised her if she violates the order she will be arrested immediately. So if she shows up at your resident's workplace or even attempts digital harassment, call us. Thank you, I said quietly. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence fill the room. Today felt heavier than yesterday, but not with dread, more like anticipation. Something was going to break. I could feel it in my bones. And I was right. It broke in the worst possible way. I made breakfast, answered a few emails, and was sitting at my desk reviewing expansion proposals when the first notification appeared on my phone. A social media tag, then another, and another. Someone had posted a video. My heart dropped when I saw the username. Ivy. I hesitated, knowing I shouldn't look, but I tapped the link anyway. The video opened with Ivy sitting on the floor of her bedroom, hair messy, mascara streaked down her cheeks like black rivers. She was heaving sobs that echoed dramatically through the microphone. She did this, she cried. My sister did this to me. The camera swiveled, showing her room a staged disaster. Clothes strewn everywhere, pictures knocked from her walls, a lamp broken on the ground. It looked like someone had torn through the room in a fit of rage. Except it wasn't me. It wasn't police. It was Ivy. I watched her collapse dramatically on the carpet. She wants to ruin me. She wants me homeless. She wants me gone. I swallowed a bitter breath. That wasn't distress, that was performance. And then she said the words that made the blood drain from my face. I'm scared of what Harper might do next. I'm scared she's dangerous. My hands tightened around the phone. Dangerous. She had used the word dangerous. The comments rolled in like a tidal wave. Oh my God, this is abuse. Your sister sounds psychotic. You need to get a restraining order against her. I'm praying for you, Ivy. She looks terrified. It was manipulation elevated to art form. By the time I reached Alden's office, my pulse was a steady, furious drumbeat. He was pacing when I entered. I saw the video. I dropped into a chair. She's framing me as violent. She staged the scene, he said, jaw clenched. We both know it. She's trying to flip the narrative, I whispered. She wants people to think I'm the abuser. She wants your credibility destroyed before court. He exhaled sharply. Classic deflection. She's panicking. I nodded. She's accelerating. He sat down across from me. And that means one thing, Harper. You need to be more strategic than ever. She's losing control, which means she's unpredictable. My stomach twisted. What now? We stay ahead of her, he said. And today that means filing a formal response to her defamatory content. I'll draft a cease and desist. If she keeps posting, she'll face civil liability on top of everything else. He paused, studying me. But there's something else. My chest tightened. He reached into his briefcase and placed a folder in front of me. The color drained from my face when I saw the heading, Petition of Emergency Evaluation Request. What is this? I whispered. It's a document your sister attempted to file this morning, he said, voice low. She claimed you were mentally unstable, delusional, and a danger to yourself and others. She attempted to request a psychiatric evaluation order. My mouth fell open. She tried to have me institutionalized. Yes. A cold, electric silence filled the room. She wanted to claim you were incompetent, he continued, that you were unfit to manage your estate. It was a strategic play. If successful, she could argue for conservatorship or forced oversight of your assets. I pressed a hand to my forehead. She really wants my estate that badly. She wants the control that comes with it. The money is secondary. I stared at the file, breath shallow. And did it go through, I asked. No, Alden said firmly. The judge denied it immediately. Your standing in the community, your professional record, and the protective order against her made the petition look retaliatory. I closed my eyes in relief. But only for a moment. Because if she was willing to do that, the battle wasn't near over. Alden's voice softened. Harper, you're not dealing with a sister anymore. You're dealing with someone who is willing to weaponize the legal system against you. I know, I whispered. So we're tightening every protection. And today we make a move of our own. What move? He opened another document. For the first time, we file for full legal damages: fraud, harassment, defamation, and attempted identity theft. We're also filing formal notice that if Ivy contacts you again directly or indirectly, we will seek criminal charges. I stared at him. This will destroy her. No, he said gently. This will stop her from destroying you. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing filings, assembling timelines, and compiling every piece of evidence: screenshots, security footage, bank records, voicemail transcripts. My life was laid out in printed pages, the truth woven between lines Ivy had spent years trying to rewrite. When we finished, Alden escorted me to the lobby. You should go home and rest. I'm fine, I lied. He gave me a knowing look. You're exhausted. I didn't argue. Driving home, the city felt different. Every red light triggered old instincts: fear, hesitation, anxiety, but the calm I'd been cultivating pushed through like a steady flame. By the time I parked in my driveway, the cleaning team had already finished scrubbing away the spray paint. The garage door was pristine again. My yard was cleared, the broken pottery replaced the lawn swept of debris. It looked like nothing had happened at all. But I had. I walked inside, set down my bag, and let the quiet wash over me. An hour passed. Then 2. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Something inside me whispered, "Don't answer." I answered anyway. The moment I heard the breathing on the other end, I knew. Ivy. She didn't speak right away. Then, in a trembling voice steeped in accusation, she said, "How could you do this to me?" I swallowed. "Ivy, you need to stop contacting me." "They're serving me papers," she cried. The sheriff came to my door in front of my neighbors. "Do you know how humiliating that is?" "You vandalized my property," I said. "You filed a false police report. You tried to access my accounts. You attempted to file an involuntary psychiatric hold." "I was desperate," she screamed. "You pushed me there." "No," I said softly. "Your choices did." She inhaled sharply. "This isn't you. You're not a monster. You're not cold like this." "I learned it," I said. "From you." Silence. Then she whispered something so quiet I almost missed it. "I don't have anyone else." My eyes stung, but I couldn't break. "Ivy, I'm not responsible for what you lost." "You're responsible for what I became," she snapped. "You think you're innocent. You think being the perfect daughter didn't ruin the rest of us. You think your success didn't make us feel small." Her voice trembled with something raw, something real. And for the first time underneath her rage, I heard the truth. Envy. Not just of my success, of my capability, my independence, my strength, my refusal to break the way she had. Her breathing was ragged. "I need you, Harper." I closed my eyes. And with a heavy heart, I said the words that separated our lives forever. "I can't be what you need. I won't be your foundation anymore. You have to stand on your own." "No," she whispered. "I can't." "You can," I said, "but you won't." Silence. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time, letting the weight of the moment sink in. I hadn't lost my sister today. I had finally accepted that she was already gone. And as I set the phone down, I realized something else. This wasn't the collapse. This was the breaking point before the collapse. And the collapse was coming, whether Ivy was ready or not. I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the windows, steady and rhythmic like a soft warning from the sky itself. For a moment I lay still beneath the covers, staring at the pale morning light stretching across my ceiling. My house felt different, quieter than usual, heavier somehow. Maybe it was just me. Maybe it was the knowledge that yesterday had pushed something in my sister past its breaking point. I rose slowly, wrapped myself in a robe, and padded downstairs. The rain made the glass walls shimmer, the garden outside blurred into watercolor greens and silvers. I made tea instead of coffee, craving something warm, steadying. But before I could even take a sip, my phone buzzed. "Alden." I answered immediately. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but clipped like he was restraining urgency. My grip tightened around the mug. "What happened?" There's been movement, he said. Significant movement, and not the kind you can ignore. My chest tightened. Where are you? On my way to your house. 10 minutes. I set the mug down. The tea sloshed gently, mirroring the unease rising in me. 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Alden stood on my porch in a charcoal coat, raindrops threading down his shoulders. His expression told me everything. This was not a small update. I let him in. Tell me. He stepped inside, took a breath, then handed me a thin folder. Ivy has retained a new attorney. My stomach dropped. Who? Jordan LeBlanc? I froze. Jordan wasn't a bus bench attorney like Martin, the one Ivy had used before. Jordan was known for aggressive tactics and messy, sensational cases. A serpent in a designer suit. She can't afford him, I whispered. No, Alden said. But your parents can. A cold wave rolled down my spine. He continued. Early this morning, Jordan filed a petition claiming emotional abuse, financial withholding, and undue influence against her. I blinked. Undue influence of me over her, yes. She's older than me by 2 years. I know. She's not dependent on me. I know. She has no evidence. Alden gave a humorless smile. He doesn't need evidence to make noise. And noise is what he thrives on. I sank into a chair, my breath shallow. What else? He sat across from me, setting another document on the table. He also filed an emergency motion to challenge the protective order. My heart hammered. On what grounds that Ivy fears you may retaliate? I let out a bitter laugh. After everything she's done to me. I know, he said softly. I rubbed my temples. How is this happening? Everything she's accusing me of, she's done herself. They're trying to flip the narrative, he said. And it's not about winning the motion, they won't. It's about exhausting you, making you appear unstable, provoking a reaction. I inhaled deeply. I won't give them one. Good, he said, because that's exactly what they want. I stared out at the rain-soaked garden where drops clung to the edges of the fountain like tiny trembling beads. What do we do now? Alden opened his briefcase. We strike first. Harder. Smarter. He handed me a stack of documents. We finalized the civil and criminal filings with the attached digital records. We push forward with charges for vandalism, identity theft, bank fraud, and false reporting. He paused. And we file for financial restitution. My breath caught. Restitution, I repeated. Harper Ivy cost you thousands in damages. She stole from you. She tried to destroy your career and your name. She vandalized your home. This isn't petty anymore. You must stop treating it like a family dispute. My jaw tightened. He continued. We are filing for full restitution of all damages, financial legal fees, emotional distress, and property repair. I stared at the papers, my chest tightening with a mixture of heartbreak and clarity. This was my sister. But she was also my saboteur. Alden placed a steady hand on the table. You're not doing this to punish her. You're doing this because she created these consequences. I nodded slowly, gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. Okay, I whispered. File it. He scribbled notes, already moving into strategy mode. But before we could continue, my phone vibrated. A notification, then another, then 10 more. Alden watched my expression tighten. What is it? I opened my social media app and felt the blood drain from my face. Ivy had posted again. Except this time it wasn't a rant or a staged breakdown. It was a full-blown accusation. A video montage of me, pictures she'd pulled from my social media over the years, clips taken out of context, screenshots of texts cropped to favor her narrative. The caption read, "My sister is ruining our family. Please help us. Save our family." The text over the video said, she's controlling, she's manipulative, she won't let me live, she's tearing us apart. My pulse hammered in my ears as I clicked the comments. Wow, Harper seems unhinged. My sister did this too, these types ruin families. You need to expose her. She looks heartless. Ivy, stay strong. A slow, controlled breath slipped from my lips. Alden leaned over to look at the screen. Defamation, he muttered. Every piece of it. That won't matter, I said. People will believe her, they always have. He met my eyes. People who matter will believe the truth. I swallowed hard. Do we respond publicly? No, he said firmly. Absolutely not. That's what she wants. Instead, we compile these posts for the case. Let her bury herself with her own lies. But before I could respond, another notification appeared. A text. From a number saved only as Dad. You need to stop this now. Your mother collapsed after the sheriff visit. Ivy is devastated. You're breaking this family. Fix it before it's too late. My heartbeat stumbled. Collapsed, I stared at the message as if it were written in flames. She collapsed, I whispered. Alden's voice stayed calm. Harper. People like your mother weaponize illness. We need confirmation before you assume this is real. You don't know her, I said. She would absolutely fake fainting if it got her sympathy. Exactly, he replied gently. So breathe. We'll verify before reacting. I closed my eyes, because he was right, and that hurt more than anything. Alden touched my shoulder lightly. There's more, I exhaled shakily. Go ahead. He handed me another file. We got approval. For what the forensic accountant's full report and the accompanying affidavit. I opened it, and there in clear, irrefutable detail was every withdrawal Ivy had made without permission. Every transfer, every forged signature attempt, every fraudulent loan application, every attempt to access my accounts. Black and white proof that she had been planning this for months, possibly years. Even the dates aligned. The same days she had claimed to be visiting friends, working overtime, trying her best. I felt sick. So much of my life, I whispered, she spent tearing me apart behind the scenes. Alden's voice was soft. People who resent what you have will do anything to convince themselves you didn't deserve it. I closed the file slowly. What now? I asked. Now, he said, we prepare for court. The judge will request a preliminary hearing within 1 to 2 weeks. Ivy will be forced to answer under oath. My pulse steadied. And he added, your mother and father may be subpoenaed as witnesses. A sharp breath escaped me. You mean? Yes, he said. They will have to choose between telling the truth or perjuring themselves. My throat tightened. That will destroy them. No, he said softly. Their choices will. I leaned back, staring at the window as the rain tapered into a delicate mist. Something inside me shifted. Not anger, not sorrow, certainty. I'm ready, I said. He nodded. Good. Because the next chapter isn't about surviving them, it's about showing the court who they really are. We finalized the paperwork, signed the last pages, and set the hearing preparation in motion. When Alden left, I walked through my house, slowly touching the walls lightly, as though reacquainting myself with something sacred. This was my sanctuary, my work, my life, and I was done letting them try to take it. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. I stepped onto my back patio, breathing in the scent of wet earth and jasmine. The sky was painted with streaks of soft coral and gold, the clouds drifting like tired sentinels. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. I stared at it, and instead of fear, I felt a slow, cold clarity settle in my bones. This wasn't victory, not yet. But it was the beginning of the end, for them. And the beginning of everything for me. The sunlight the morning of the hearing felt too bright, almost intrusive, as if the world was daring me to blink, to hesitate, to fall back into the version of myself, who once tried so desperately to keep the peace. But that woman was gone. What remained was someone sharpened by betrayal, steadied by truth, and no longer willing to make herself small for the comfort of others. I stood before the mirror in my room, adjusting the collar of my navy suit. My hands were steady, my breath was steady. Even my heartbeat felt different, calmer, heavier, grounded. Outside, a soft wind rustled through the tall hedges surrounding the property, brushing against the windows like a quiet reminder that the world kept moving, no matter how violently it tried to shatter your life. When Alden arrived, I met him at the door. He looked polished and focused, carrying his leather case filled with every scrap of evidence we'd collected. "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for a long time," I said. We drove in silence to the courthouse, the city waking up around us in muted tones, morning commuters in their cars, coffee shops opening their doors, street vendors unloading crates of fruit. Ordinary life. For a moment I let the normalcy wash over me. Soon I would be free again to live in that world. Free from Ivy's jealousy, free from the emotional blackmail of my parents, free from the fight that had consumed so much of my energy. Inside the courthouse it was cool, almost chilly. The echo of our footsteps bounced off marble floors. I recognized the hallway instantly. This was the same place where I'd filed restraining orders for clients years ago, back when I worked in property law helping families survive legal storms. I never imagined I'd end up on the other side of one. As we approached the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors opened from the inside. Ivy stepped out. Her appearance was jarring. She was dressed in a beige suit too big for her shoulders, her hair hastily tied back. She looked tired, hollow, like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes landed on me and something flickered anger, desperation, or maybe shock that I still looked whole. "Harper," she said, voice wavering. I didn't respond. I simply looked at her waiting. Her expression crumpled. "Please." "Can we talk?" Before all this starts, Alden stepped forward, blocking her approach with measured professionalism. "Ms. Whitlock, any communication must occur with counsel present. You know this." Ivy's eyes darted between us. "You're really going to do this," she whispered. "After everything we've been through, I'm your sister." "You were my sister," I said quietly. "And then you made a choice." Her face tightened. "You think I wanted any of this? You think I wanted to lose control of my life? I was drowning, Harper. And you just kept rising. Everyone loved you. Everyone praised you. And I." She stopped swallowing hard. I could almost feel the courtroom guards watching us. "Ivy." I said, my voice steady, but not unkind. "This isn't happening because you struggled. It's happening because you chose to destroy me to avoid fixing yourself." Her eyes glistened. "You could have saved me." "I did," I said, "over and over, but you don't want saving, you want replacing, and that's something I can't offer." She opened her mouth to reply, but the bailiff stepped out. "Hearing is starting. Counsel and parties inside." Alden placed a hand on my back. "Let's go." We walked past her. She stood frozen, as if realization hit her too late. Inside, the judge presiding was the kind of woman who commanded a room simply by existing. Crisp gray hair, a face carved from discipline eyes that read guilt before you even spoke. Judge Hollinger. I knew her reputation. She valued truth, preparation, and accountability above theatrics. Case number 48. Whitlock versus Whitlock, the clerk announced. It felt surreal sitting at the plaintiff's table with Alden, while Ivy sat across the room with her lawyer LeBlanc, adjusting his designer glasses like this was a performance he'd rehearsed. My parents were in the second row, my mother clutching a tissue, my father stiff as stone. Judge Hollinger looked up. "This case includes allegations of fraud, identity theft, coercion, vandalism, defamation, and attempted unlawful gain of trust assets. Evidence submitted exceeds 400 pages. Parties may proceed." LeBlanc stood first, full of performative sorrow. "Your Honor, my client has suffered severe emotional and psychological distress at the hands of her older sister. Spare me the dramatics," Judge Hollinger cut in. "Facts only, counsel." LeBlanc's smile twitched. Alden stood next, calm and clear. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate through financial records, digital evidence, eyewitness accounts, forensic discrepancies, and the defendant's own documented communications that Ms. Ivy Whitlock engaged in a coordinated effort to defraud my client of her estate home and identity." Judge Hollinger nodded. "Proceed." The next hour unfolded like a slow unraveling of truth thread by thread. Alden presented bank withdrawals Ivy had forged. The forged loan application using my social security number, the messages she'd sent me threatening legal action, the footage of her vandalizing my property, the transcript of her call with her parents plotting to pressure me, the defamation videos, the staged breakdowns, the fake accusations, every piece hit harder than the last. By the time Alden displayed the doctored agreement she had tried to make me sign, a hush fell over the courtroom so deep I could hear the shivering breath of the woman behind me. Then Alden presented the final blow, the trust documentation. This, he said, laying the binder on the evidence table, is the Blackwood Trust. Established 5 years prior, the defendant attempted to obtain trust assets she has no legal access to, and attempted to coerce the trustee into violating federal fiduciary law. LeBlanc looked rattled now. Judge Hollinger's lips tightened. "Ms. Whitlock, please rise." Ivy stood. "Do you deny the evidence presented today?" Ivy's voice cracked. I was desperate. You don't understand, she always had everything. I just needed." Judge Hollinger raised a hand. "Need does not justify criminal action." Tears slid down Ivy's face. "She abandoned me. Our parents abandoned me. I had nothing." I stared at her. No anger left, just a quiet ache for the girl she once was and the enemy she'd become. The judge exhaled, measured. The court rules in favor of the plaintiff. Full restitution is ordered for damages, legal fees, property vandalism, identity fraud costs, and defamation impact. A protective order is granted for 3 years. In addition, criminal charges will proceed based on evidence reviewed. My mother gasped. My father lowered his head. Ivy collapsed into her seat, sobbing silently. The gavel's sharp crack marked the end. Just like that. Outside, the late morning sun was rising higher, warming the steps of the courthouse. I stood there breathing in fresh air like it was a new life being poured into my lungs. My parents approached me slowly. For once they looked small, like 2 people finally seeing the damage they'd helped carve. My mother whispered, "We didn't know." "Yes," I said softly. "You did." My father opened his mouth to speak, but I shook my head. "Love isn't blind," I said. "It just chooses where to look." And I walked away. Alden joined me by the car. "It's over," he said. "No," I said, watching the sunlight spill across the pavement. "It's mine again. My life." That night I sat on my balcony overlooking the city. Lights shimmered below like scattered gold. The house felt peaceful, truly peaceful for the first time in years. No footsteps storming down hallways, no whispers behind closed doors, no fear of what sabotage waited the next day. Just me, whole, unbroken, reclaimed. I raised a glass of wine to the night sky, to peace, to freedom, to finally choosing myself. And if you're still here with me listening to Harper's journey, thank you. Stories like this remind us how powerful reclaiming your voice can be. If her resilience spoke to you, let me know in the comments. Tell me you're here. Tell me what part resonated. And if you want to walk with me into the next story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay close. There's so much more ahead.